Hi everyone, this is Prof. Sheets, and this video is going to cover the roles and responsibilities of a TESOL teacher. To start, I want us to picture a scenario. You have completed your interview and you just got the call that you were hired as an ELL teacher in your district. Great news! But what do? What activities or responsibilities do you have prior to that first day? Or when that first day comes when the school year starts, what does it look like? What do? Your answer to this scenario might depend on the style of classroom you have or the school system you have. There are three types of ELL education. The first is bilingual, so a very specific school system that uses two languages or multiple languages. There could be an inclusion mainstream system in which classes are primarily content-based and ELLs are part of that mainstream classroom. And last one, a separation style system in which ELLs are pulled out of the classroom for sheltered instruction, teaching, or ELL-specific classes. For the purposes of this presentation and course, we're going to focus on mainstream and separation style classrooms. Whichever scenario you have, it would likely follow similar steps. The first being a home language survey. So before the school year starts, the student would likely take a survey to determine if they are EL applicable or have language needs. Once those students have been identified, they would likely undergo WIDA testing or some sort of placement testing to determine their proficiency in language needs. Based on those needs, the TESOL teacher can create an ILP, or individualized language plan. Much like an IEP, the ILP specifies accommodations that the student can have in the classroom, as well as extracurriculars such as sports, and other services they might be entitled to, like a translator or dictionary. After these students have been identified and their needs specified, it's time to instruct or assist. So based on the school system, you might have your own classroom where you teach, or you might be in a classroom co-teaching and supporting students. Beyond those lessons, you'd also be advocating for student needs and interacting with the community and parents, making sure student rights are upheld and their needs are met. As well as these lessons in advocacy, you would have continued testing, gathering data to document the student's progress and determine when they can exit from their specified program. Additionally, we want to collect data to determine funding and resources. So based on that progress or those needs, if new materials are needed or new initiatives are needed. To help illustrate some of these concepts, I want to show a home language survey and an ILP. So here's a home language survey from Indiana and one from the Department of Education in Ohio. We can see that they kind of ask similar questions, specifically what the student's language is at home and what they speak most often. Based on that information, the school can determine if the student has English language learning needs. Here's an ILP for a level 1 or pre-emergent learner. We can see here that the ILP specifies adaptations to the classroom as well as assistive technology that the student is entitled to. Here's another ILP for a level 3 or intermediate learner, just to illustrate how those modifications might look for a different level. So why do we have ILPs, a home language survey? Why do we have WIDA testing? A lot of this stems from several key pieces of legislation regarding English language learners. So as a quick review, here are 4 key laws that I want to discuss. The first is Law v. Nichols, which we refer to as the remedies. In this court case, it was identified that a sink or swim style of teaching ELLs, or the idea of putting an ELL in a mainstream classroom with no support or resources, that style of teaching was not equitable. So the remedies determined that schools must provide some sort of language support or education. This then led to the Castaneda and Pickard case, which we refer to as the standards. Building kind of on the remedies, it strove to specify what we mean by language support and education, because as it was written before, a lot of things could be language support and education, even if they weren't that great. So the standard said that whatever support you choose, it must be based on sound theory, resources and support must be provided, and that program must be assessed frequently to determine its effectiveness. So the great thing is now we have a standard for ELL support and education. And even though it gave us more details, it also is still kind of vague. There are a lot of theories and resources out there, and frequently is a vague term. How frequently what determines effectiveness. So as great as it was, there were still some things lacking. Next, we have Plyer v. Doe, which is a court case that students, regardless of their documentation status, are entitled to public education. So this is a very relevant case for our political climate, as this is still a current issue. Lastly, we have the Every Student Succeeds Act, which replaced No Child Left Behind. And some additions to that act were specifying an exit procedure for ELLs, more details about what that looks like, as well as the data needed for it. Additionally, this act explained how to get supplemental funding, or what supplemental funding can be used for in terms of ELL support and education. So with these laws, there are some key takeaways. Pardon me. The first is, as I mentioned, that this vision for what an ELL education looks like is not entirely clear. So your role as a TESOL teacher then is to make sure you advocate for what is pedagogically sound and research-backed, and that you also are aware of what is ethical and valid assessment of language. Because those standards are so vague, your responsibility then is to make sure it's aligned and correct. Next is that some of these laws really love data. So as a TESOL teacher, you're going to have to become an expert on and get really comfortable with data analysis, data management, as well as testing procedures. Lastly, as a TESOL teacher, you will likely participate in requiring or requesting funding, and that request is kind of complicated. So you'll need to practice writing grants, staying up to date on budgets and spending, both at the local and state level, as well as requesting that funding from the government. Here are some resources in case you want to review those laws and legislation in more depth. The first is from TESOL. They have a great document outlining Every Student Succeeds. There's Color in Colorado, which has a page about landmark cases, and then there's a chapter from Rights Text Foundations for Teaching Language Learners that covers key cases. So I've hit you with a lot of information, but the main idea is that TESOL is more than teaching. There are a lot of roles we have as TESOL teachers. So to kind of help bring these all together, I'd like you to draw what a TESOL teacher looks like. So it could be a panel, a comic, a scene, but let's try and capture all that a TESOL teacher does. To help, I want you to think about how you dress. So what kind of attire do you wear in the classroom, or when you're in the community, or at the state board? How do you communicate with students? What language do you use? What messages are you trying to send? How do you communicate with faculty and staff? How do you interact with the community? How prepared are you, and what are you preparing? Do you need to be flexible, and what would that look like? What kind of titles do you carry? And what are all the rooms you'll have to be in as a TESOL teacher? So your drawing, it might be hard to get all these things in there. You'll kind of have a very complex drawing, but I'm hoping you understand that it is more than a classroom for TESOL teachers, that there's a lot that goes into being a TESOL teacher.